7 lampstands symbolizing the 7 spirits that watch over the 7 churches of Asia Minor. 7 seals seal the great scroll. 7 angels blow 7 trumpets of God's intervention for his people. Do we see a theme here in the book of Revelation? And as we enter into the final phase of God's intervention against those who persecute God's people, we will see the number 7 used again in the 7 bowls that pour forth the 7 last plagues. And in these plagues, we see another example of how the writings of the apocalyptic style make use of images from the past to give hope for the future and meaning for what is going on in the present. And the event of the past that the 7 last plagues call forth is the Exodus of Egypt, perhaps the central event in the history of Israel when God freed his people from slavery. What we hear about are reminiscent of the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt that are now coming upon the entire world as these bowls are poured forth. With the first bowl, we see affecting only sinners the plague of boils growing upon their flesh. With the second and third bowl, we see something reminiscent of the first plague against Egypt, in which for the second bowl, the sea is turned to blood, and with the third bowl, rivers and springs are turned to blood. With the fourth bowl, men are burned with fire, just as we saw in Egypt with the fire that came upon the falling of the hail. With the pouring of the fifth bowl, the kingdom is plunged into darkness, just as Egypt was plunged into darkness during the 10 plagues. With the pouring of the sixth bowl, the river Euphrates dries up, again a river close to Babylon, but then spirits that look like frogs, just as we saw in Egypt, go forth to summon all the kings together for one last battle against the forces of good, against God and his holy people. Finally, with the pouring of the seventh bowl, we see the fall of Babylon, reminiscent of the exile, and in this case representative of Rome, but it is also accompanied with a great earthquake and the falling of great hailstones from the sky, just as we saw in the Exodus from Egypt. So these 7 last plagues bring forth again, in a much greater magnitude, the plagues that came upon Egypt. Not all of them, but some of the more principal plagues that we see in the past in the event of the Exodus are now being brought upon the people who persecute God's people in the present to give them hope that God will bring them out of this period of persecution. But perhaps the most legendary image and event to come out of the 7 last plagues is the place in which, after the pouring of the 6th bowl, the frog-like spirits summon all the kings of the earth. And it states that they gather in a place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. And we will talk about the imagery and symbolism and the possible meanings of Armageddon in our up-and-coming video.